Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Please sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com for weekly updates about my podcasts, events, and more. Also, follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and also at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And finally, join my virtual book club called Zibby's Virtual Book Club, which meets every other Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time until 3 p.m. and features half an hour of book club discussion followed by 30 minutes of Q&A with the author whose book we've just discussed. You can sign up on my website, zibbyowens.com, under the Virtual Book Club section, or even on Instagram under the link in my bio. I hope you'll find me in all these different channels and enjoy this podcast. Today's episode has been sponsored by Faherty. Faherty is basically my favorite clothing store that exists. I thought I was finding this undiscovered gem in a tiny little mall in California in Palisades Village. Anyway, I went into Faherty one day and freaked out, and I've been following them ever since. I love their clothes, and so does my husband Kyle. And you can enter code Zibby, Z-I-B-B-Y, and get 25% off on their website, fahertybrand.com, FAHERTYBRAND.com. I kind of hate to tell you all about Faherty because I kind of liked being in the know and having my own secret stash of clothes, but it's amazing and you will love them, especially their new cozy fall sweaters, which I've been wearing on Instagram, and their pants, which have the maternity band type thing up top and fit everybody. Their shirt dresses, their shirt/jackets for guys. Anyway, they're amazing. Enter code Zibby, get 25% off. I've done this now a couple times and really have to stop. So anyway, please order. Cameron Douglas is the author of Long Way Home, a memoir of fame, family, and redemption. He and I did this talk together as part of the JCC Houston's book festival, and we had a really great time and even did a pre-festival VIP talk. So by the time this part of the conversation rolled around, we had already been chatting for quite some time. In fact, we ended up chatting for almost 2 hours, which is longer than I feel like I've spoken to anyone recently. So this is an excerpt from that event. Cameron Douglas has a career in both film and now in writing, and you'll hear more about what he's up to in his book. In terms of filmography, he was in Mr. Nice Guy, It Runs in the Family, National Lampoon's Adam and Eve, Loaded, and The Runner, and now is working on screenplays and other works, having been incarcerated for almost a decade and having overcome a drug addiction that plagued his celebrity-strewn family, including Michael Douglas and Kirk Douglas. I hope you enjoy this interview. I had a really fun time getting to know Cameron. Hi, Cameron.
Hi, Zibby.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. We got a little preview beforehand, and all these people stole some of my questions, but I'll come up with some more.
Because you're a pro.
Okay, Long Way Home, a memoir of fame, family, and redemption. You have been through so much in your life, and you're younger than me. It's unbelievable. Why did you decide to put it all into a book? Why write a book about this at all?
Well, so, the short answer, I'll give you the short answer first, and then I'll elaborate a little bit. I think the short answer was to try to take, some of these experiences that I've been through, some of them very painful, some of them lovely, and turn them into something useful for people. So that's the short answer. To be a little more long-winded, at first, I didn't know it was my father that was really pushing me to write this book, and I was confused about that. As we talked about earlier, because our family has always been very private. But it was helpful. It was out of love that he was pushing me to write this book, and also out of the fact that he and the rest of my family felt that I had a story to tell and a story to share, and at the expense of some of their privacy, they felt that it was worthwhile. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. It's been a long journey. I started writing the book before I came home in 2015, 2016, and it took about 4 years to write all in all. And I must say I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself, which is important, I think, to have insights like that when you've paid such a high price for your decisions.
And you mentioned earlier that it was really your time in prison that allowed you to get in touch with your feelings. And I wanted just to hear a little more about how that happened. Were you in prison one day and you asked for a notebook, or how do you start writing How did you start writing there? And how did you find the time? And how in control of your time even were you?
So it started really when I was doing my first fairly long stretch in solitary confinement. It was around 11 months, and it was fairly early on in my sojourn through prison. I had a really difficult time adjusting. My journey was very atypical. I started at a minimum security, and I worked my way up to a high security, and that's not the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to go the other way. But as I said, I really had a difficult time settling in. I was very angry at myself, which I think is understandable. And I don't think I dealt with that very well. So as a result, I just made life even more difficult for myself. But, I'd like to think that it was, some of it was necessary. It's part of my journey. And from where I'm sitting today, I probably wouldn't be here without a lot of those experiences. But so I was in solitary confinement, and obviously you can imagine you're in there 23 hours a day, 23 hours a day. You get 1 hour 3 times a week. So, most days you're in there 24/7. And then on the days that you do come out for that hour, usually they'll come get you at around 4:30 in the morning. And if you're on the East Coast, they take you outside to a little cage, and it's just freezing out there. And so I opted to sleep in most of the time anyways. But I started journaling, and, it was just, what I try to do is I try to set up a curriculum for myself, to kind of keep my mind active. And it made me feel like I was taking some of my freedom back. But the curriculum was reading, and I'd read, 3 books. I'd have a sort of self-help type of book. Then I'd read like a literary classic, something you might read in an English lit class in college. And then I'd have like a beach read, like Game of Thrones or something like that. So I had that. I had my exercise, meditation, and writing. And yeah, so I don't want to speak for too long, but that's where it started.
I love the idea of you sitting, I mean, not love, but that comical vision of you in solitary confinement with a beach read. It's like so against what you would think, but that's great that literature could provide you with that outlet as it does. That's like some of the power of books to begin with, and where better to escape than when you literally can't. So
it really is. And then I'll fully answer your question. So you have this book cart that comes around, a couple times a week. And I got this book off the cart by this great American classic author, Stephen Crane. And he had this book of short stories called The Red Badge of Courage. And they're all fantastic stories. The Red Badge of Courage in particular really sort of spoke to me and kind of, gave me something that I think was necessary for me at that time. And I was so taken by his writing that I got in touch with my friend. You get one phone call every 3 weeks. So I got on the phone and I asked, I forget who, I said, look, find me some more books by this guy, Stephen Crane. And I didn't realize he was a well-known poet as well. So what came in the mail was all these books of poetry. And I was like, what am I going to do with this? I'm not really, I've always was fairly well educated, but I've never really connected with poetry. But I started, reading them, as you can imagine, every time, my sweetheart. And I was just, for the first time, I really was taken by poetry and inspired by it. So I started playing around a little bit, and that's kind of where it started.
Wow, it's nice to have the little one. I was warning you that this good stage was going to end. Anyway, In your book, you talked when you were younger about developing what your mom called the curly whirlies, where you would like spin your hair around, and your anxiety was clearly manifesting itself from an early age. Do you feel like some of your later behaviors were your own way of coping with maybe a anxiety disorder that wasn't really treated, or underlying things? Like, where do you think, now that you're in a totally new place, emotionally, where did that all come from? Where did it, and what would you do to sort of prevent this trajectory from happening to, say, your daughter?
Yeah, I've always felt, especially, as a child and then as a teenager, I always felt sort of uncomfortable in my own skin. And I would do everything I could to not let on to that, and And I think I learned at a fairly early age that, by getting high or getting buzzed, I could find that it would allow me to feel comfortable, And I think, looking back on everything, one thing that I really had a chance to take advantage of, but I didn't, that I think would have been extremely helpful is therapy. Had I been a little more open and willing to talk to somebody as a teenager, I think maybe it would have been helpful. So that's something that I let anybody know. Anybody, I mean, I have friends that have kids that are struggling. I tell people that I care about, to give it a chance, because it's a big part of my life today. It just took me so long. It wasn't until till maybe 6 months before I was being released from prison. And I remember one day saying to myself, I think I'm ready to give therapy a chance when I get home. And so I followed through on that, and it's been very helpful for me.
I thought it was so funny that when you got out of prison, one of the things you realized you missed the most was going to the dentist. Who knew?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. I mean, I was pretty fortunate with my dental situation in prison, but it's funny. My partner Vivian, who I live with and who we have a daughter together. So I've known her for many years, but we were just she reached out to me. She wrote me a letter, and I wrote her a letter back, and we hadn't seen each other in many, many years. And so finally, when we got on the phone together, and I had my visiting privileges suspended for a long time, and finally I was getting them back. We've been talking for about a year, and I was on the phone with her. I said, look, I just want to warn you, I only have 3 teeth left. You know what I mean? I said, so I feel a little self-conscious about it. You know what I mean? It was dead silence on the line for a second. Then I started laughing. But that's, it can be a bad place for your teeth. That's for sure.
You wrote throughout the book about so many different losses, and I don't feel like you necessarily framed them as such, but they just kept popping up in one way or another. Even your Manny, essentially, who I thought it was so funny that your dad had a busboy and was like, he seems like a good nanny, and the next thing you know, he takes care of you intimately for years, which is one method of recruiting babysitters I have not tried yet, but now I'm going to open my mind to that. But even with him being so close to you for so many years and then gets let go of and immediately disappears, that's a big loss. And your pet ferret getting eaten by your dog. I mean, these are heartbreaking things, particularly at that age and time of life. And then of course, as life goes on and more things happen, what do you think those early losses, do you feel like they were as significant as I'm perhaps making them, or less so? Or I know you wrote about them a lot, so clearly you found them to have some importance.
Well, Joaquin is somebody that to this day, I think about, and sometimes I'll even think I see him, but he was a huge part of my life, and that was a difficult loss. And yeah, I think, kids are sensitive, and, in life, things are going to happen. But, when you're young, you need people to kind of help you through it. And if they may not be available, and I think they do leave a little scar, and you try to figure out a way to deal with it yourself, and you don't maybe have all the sort of coping mechanisms at the time. But again, listen, life is, that's what it is. It's full of loss and hardship, and that's what builds character. And we have the decision to make choices as a result of these things that we go through, and some choices I think are better than others, so just can't really blame it on Joaquin and my ferret. Although I would have liked to. I think I told that to the judge, right?
Well, maybe we could talk about your family in case that played more of a role in some way. You painted such a loving picture of your dad, and your mom at times you had kind of a inconsistent, or you painted her as somewhat inconsistent, I would say, in her availability and emotional availability, physical presence, all of that. But you really made your dad seem like, he wanted to compensate for having a famous father himself by being a great dad to you and making sure that you didn't feel the way he had felt. It's like this whole full circle thing, and was really there for you and tried all these things when you did develop your drug addiction to help. But I wonder, looking back, what do you think he could have done or your mom could have done to have prevented your addiction from spiraling in the way that it did? Or was it just once it started, there was sort of no way to really reel it back in because you didn't really want it to stop?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I got to a place in my life where there's nothing that they could do. It's interesting, so with my father, one of his bones, that he has with my mother. My mother was so young when she had me, 19 or 20. And my father's career was kind of just getting going. And it's a career that takes a lot of time, a lot of focus, a lot of attention. And so, my father, often felt like, he had two kids to take care of, my mother and myself. And my mother, was so young, and she didn't like the business. She's European, and sort of came to the States and met my father, and didn't like the business, and was angry and lonely as well, and she was still extremely young herself. So they had a lot of things going on, but I was always, loved and well cared for, but maybe just didn't have, the attention that I was needing. So that kind of forced me to sort of look elsewhere, for that love and attention. And I guess, starting as a younger teenager, I started finding that with a group of people that were, sort of rough around the edges. And that's not to say they're bad people or anything like that. It's just, people that were sort of going down that road that would eventually lead to some issues. And that's kind of, and that's sort of what happened. I remember at one point in my life, I was wondering to myself, I can't believe, if I'm not in prison, who are these people in prison? I was wrapped up in all these different things, but I just wasn't physically there yet. I was well on my way. And that's it. If you're living that life, and there's a place for you if you continue to live that way.
There were so many moments where you just should not have survived the car crash. Like, there were just so many, the drug, the seizures, like, it's like a miracle that we're even on a Zoom call right now. It's crazy. What do you attribute that to? And do you feel like you have some sort of perspective on life, having lived through all of this, that perhaps others of us can't have or don't necessarily have, having sort of cheated death so many times?
I definitely, have been fortunate. I have, angels watching over me. I've certainly not been careful with my life, and often not valued it properly. And maybe subconsciously there was some purpose behind that. But, I guess that wasn't to be, my story. I wasn't going to be the way that my story was going to end, whether I wanted it to or not. And so I sort of, I guess I like to think that there's something that I have to offer before it's all said and done.
Well, obviously, one thing you have to offer is your story, which is going to help so many other people who are struggling. If, hopefully they'll all be reading it and can get back on track or get what they need out of it. I mean, it's an amazing gift when somebody shares their story so openly like that. So that's awesome. You also talked about dealing with your dad's cancer diagnosis and treatment and how you felt about it. And I was just wondering if you could share a little about that period of time and what it was like for you.
Yeah, that was, well, so for those of you that haven't read my book, I found out that he had cancer by one of the inmates that I was on the compound with. He came up to me and he said, "Hey, Cam, I'm so sorry to hear about your dad." I said, "What are you talking about? I just saw him." He said, "So what are you talking about?" He said, "I hear he has cancer." I said, "No, I don't think so." And then a couple more steps, and then somebody else came up to me, so I went in and got on the payphone and tried to call him, and he didn't answer. So I called a friend of mine, and the first thing she said, when she picked up the phone was, "I'm so sorry to hear about your father." So I said, "Well, what's going on? What happened?" And she told me that, it came out in the press that he had stage 4 throat cancer. And so I sat with that for a little while and obviously, tried to get in touch with him. And when I finally did, he felt bad. He said, that he didn't want me to worry. But yeah, I'll tell you, it really gave me a real respect for what these cancer survivors go through, because I saw him about 3 weeks before, he started his treatments, which was the radiation and the chemotherapy. And, he looked great. He looked healthy, how he always does. And then he came to visit me about a month and a half after his last treatment. And it was maybe 3 months or something like that. And I've never seen a body change so drastically in such a short amount of time. So it's a real fight, but fortunately, he made it, because one of the extremely unfortunate things about going away for so long is that life goes on, and as a result, you lose people, and it happens a lot. So you just, you hope that, anyway, I was hoping that I would make it home to see him, and I, he got better long before I came home, so that was good.
Wow. So what is your relationship like now? Do you feel like, with your family, do you feel like you've repaired any of the sort of rifts that may have occurred over time? Do you just feel like there's still enormous support? Like what's it like now, and how has it been with the book as an entrant into the family as well?
Well, ironically enough, or oddly enough, everybody was really behind the book, which was nice. That's, obviously, that's important to me. And so yeah, that made it easier. But, in terms of, my relationship with my mother and father are fantastic. It's taken some time, particularly with my father. It was, so many years I had been living in a certain way, and nobody knows that better than the people that are closest to you. So to be living like that for so many years, and then to go away to a place like prison, and as I said, I spent most of my time in higher security prisons, which is a different reality in and of itself. It's like, who is coming home? You know what I mean? And I think that was, everybody was kind of protecting themselves a little bit, or maybe even more than a little bit. But, it's just consistency, and I did a lot of growing up while I was away. I wish I was able to do that, before having to go to that length. But, I feel like I made the most of it, if that can be possible in a situation like that. And so the consistency, that I've shown since coming home, and, is everything. And we're in a great place.
That's great. And
Yeah.
tell me more about your current writing. You had mentioned that you are working on screenplays, that this book is being adapted. Tell me about all your exciting projects now.
Yeah, well, it's nice. Things are really just kind of starting to come together. And it was 3 years of kind of awkwardness and kind of trying to find my stride. But then, it just takes a little bit of time, and things start to come together. So, the acting is something I jumped right into, and I finished filming my first feature-length film in years in January of this year, so the beginning of this year. And I just finally saw a cut of it, it looked good, and it's being submitted to all the film festivals and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens with that. And then I've been writing a lot, during this quarantine. And it's been trying to, I hate to say it's been great, because I know it's been so hard and difficult for so many people, but I really, as somebody that's procrastinated a lot in life and wasted a lot of time, I went into this quarantine with a mindset like, I have these projects that I really want to accomplish, and I feel like I did so. So I finished my first screenplay just a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm just kind of refining it a little bit. It's too long. That's I think a good problem to have, at least initially. And then the book, Long Way Home, people have been interested in it. And I teamed up with a production company called Fabrique, and this amazing writer showrunner named Tom Fontana. And he's adapting it into an ongoing series, which is which is it's been exciting for me. It's been great to work with these guys, in particular Tom. He's a great writer, and it's nice because it's a fictionalized version of my story. So it's just based on my story, but all the characters in it will be fictionalized, and of course, to make it an ongoing series, you need some wiggle room. It's been exciting. It's been very exciting.
You have a chapter, Orange Isn't the New Black. So this is going to be like the counter, show to that one, or a companion piece in a way.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be interesting. So I'm excited to see what comes of that.
And how has it been? This is a big question, but what has it been like being a dad? How does it feel to have a daughter and to have a whole new perspective on life as a parent? What's that been like for you?
It's been interesting in regards to my own mother and father. It's been nice for them, I think, in particular, because it sort of balanced the playing field a little bit. It's given me some insights into, what they were dealing with and, what a parent deals with. But my daughter is my biggest teacher. She really is. I've learned so much about myself and really grown as a human being since she's graced us with her presence. So it's pretty special, as you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have to aspiring authors, somebody who wants to write their story? Maybe it's not quite as dramatic as yours, but wants to get it down, wants it to help other people. What would you say?
Well, nothing happens until you put the pen to paper, or until you start, banging away on the keyboard. So, I think that's the first thing with anything, and even like with the screenplay, it's just been thinking about it for so long, and kind of, screenplay is an art in and of itself. And so, was, let's say a little intimidated by it, but, it was just like, starting to buy Final Draft, you know what I mean, to write the screenplay and just start figuring it out and banging away. And it comes, and I think, I don't think one writes with the intention of, making some big bestseller, or, I guess that's great if that happens, but, you just write, because you have something inside of you that you want to share, that needs to come out. But you got to get started. So I think if you get started and it's something that's for you, then you'll see that you'll go from there. Or if you get started and you're like, no, this is not for me, then you can move on to the next project.
Screenwriting's not for me. Next.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I also was wondering, are you still friends? In the book, you mentioned there was a boy named John you were friends with, and you filmed a movie together, and your dad started to help, and he was like, well, this production value has gone up a lot. Are you still friends with that guy?
I am.
You are? That's awesome.
Yeah, he's one of my oldest friends. He's actually a very successful producer now in his own right here in town, and he's doing fantastic. He just had a little boy, and he's married, and lives about 15 minutes away from me. So we snuck a couple visits in during quarantine, but, really it's, just kind of been keeping to ourselves like most people, but looking forward to see my friends and everything. But yeah, him and I have also, been through a lot. We have a lot of funny stories together.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for doing this for the JCC, and thanks for letting us seriously into your home and the chaos that is having a child, which I am very familiar with. So
we made it. We did pretty good. I thought it was going to sort of fall apart earlier, but we did pretty good.
No, it was great. Great.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun with you, Zibby, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere down the road or staying in touch. And thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. It's been really, really a lot of fun with you guys tonight.
Thanks so much to Faherty Brand for being my sponsor this week. FahertyBrand.com. Enter code Zibby for 25% off. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at ZibbyOwens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.